Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Paul Jagot. Hope to see you right here next week.
And we begin with new developments on the deadly rampage in New Zealand. The man accused of opening fire inside 2 mosques during Friday prayers yesterday, appearing in court. Police accusing the gunman of killing at least 49 people and injuring dozens more, and live streaming the massacre on social media. Welcome to a brand new hour inside America's News headquarters. I'm Arthel Neville.
Hello, Arthel.
Hi, Eric.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn. Thank you for being with us. The self-proclaimed white supremacist has been charged with murder and is expected to face even more charges. This as the small island nation is reeling with grief and searching for answers. Survivors are speaking out.
I thought it was somebody probably playing firecrackers or something. Then I heard one of the brothers call, some of the brothers got shot. And then I heard some more shotguns.
It was terrible. So many people, some of them were screaming. They were asking me to get some water for them.
This has sent shockwaves around the globe. Kitty Logan, live in London with the very latest. So, Kitty, what happened in court today?
Well, Eric, this was the initial court appearance by the suspect on a single murder charge. He is likely to face more charges over the other deaths, the judge tells us. Now, this is the 28-year-old man who's the primary suspect in the shootings. The court ordered his face to be blurred. He wore a white prison outfit and he remained silent throughout the hearing. He has been remanded in custody again until his next court hearing on April the 8th. Meanwhile, forensics work at the scene of the shootings is continuing for the police to gather more evidence to support this court case. Of course, they're also trying to establish if anyone else may be linked to this main suspect. His online manifesto did detail his motives, but it did not indicate any associates. So police are, at the moment, working on the assumption that this gunman acted alone, but they are keeping an open mind, Eric.
And, Kitty, meanwhile, that island nation has been described as a paradise. It's so unused to this, really. Christchurch, what is the mood there following this?
Well, today people have been trying to come to terms with the shock and grief. Of course, this is the biggest mass shooting that New Zealand has experienced in its entire history. And today we saw in Christchurch people lighting candles, laying flowers at a makeshift memorial. Many of the victims, of course, were themselves refugees who fled violence in war-torn countries like Syria and Afghanistan. There are also stories emerging of acts of heroism, a man who died to save others and a local woman who gave first aid. And also today, the Prime Minister of New Zealand met with members of the Muslim community. She offered them her reassurance and her support. Eric?
All right, Kitty. Thank you so much. Arthur.
Eric, thank you. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi vowing to override President Trump's first veto since taking office. The president rejecting an effort by Congress to block his national emergency over security at the southern border after 12 Republicans broke party lines to pass the resolution that would block the president's move.
Congress has the freedom to pass this resolution, and I have the duty to veto it, and I'm very proud to veto it. And I'm very proud, as I said, of a lot of Republican senators that were with me. And I'm also very proud of the House. The Republicans in the House voted overwhelmingly in favor of a secure border.
Let's go to Garrett Tinney. He's live at the White House with the latest on this story. Hey, Garrett.
Hey, Arthel. Despite that presidential veto, Democrats are not giving up their fight to block this presidential declaration, national declaration of emergency. Before the president had even signed that veto, Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted her plan, saying on March 26th, the House will once again act to protect our Constitution and our democracy from the president's emergency declaration by holding a vote to override his veto. House Republicans will have to choose between their partisan hypocrisy and their sacred oath to support and defend the Constitution. Hashtag fake emergency. Shortly after that, in the Oval Office, President Trump insisted there is a crisis on the southern border, which he has a constitutional duty to address.
Yesterday, Congress passed a dangerous resolution that, if signed into law, would put countless Americans in danger, very grave danger. It is definitely a national emergency. Rarely have we had such a national emergency. Therefore, to defend the safety and security of all Americans, I will be signing and issuing a formal veto of this reckless resolution.
Congress is not expected to override the president's veto. A two-thirds majority is needed, and the House was about 40 votes short of that last month. The Senate was 8 short this week. Democrats are now looking at what other options they have to block the president's emergency declaration, such as joining a lawsuit 20 states have filed against the administration over it, and possibly including language in future spending bills to prevent the president from redirecting congressional funds in the future. From a historical perspective, President Trump, like his recent predecessors, has largely avoided using his veto power. At this point in his presidency, President Obama had issued 2, and while Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton had none, George H.W. Bush had 20, Ronald Reagan 15, and Jimmy Carter 19. Only a handful of those vetoes were eventually overridden by Congress, and the White House does not expect to see that happen this time around either. Arthel?
All right, Garrett Tinney, thank you very much.
You got it.
Eric.
So what will happen? Dave Brown is a Democratic strategist. Matt Gorman, former communications director for the Republican National Congressional Committee. Welcome to you both. Matt, let me start with you. Does a failure to override, does that strengthen or weaken the president's position on this?
I don't think it really matters much. I think people see that it's a political vote and a waste of time regardless. Look, the House has weighed in before. The Senate's voted its conscience. President Trump has vetoed. I think we need to move on and go back with the business of the country. I think this is a distraction with Nancy Pelosi, and it's a way for her to paper over the figures in her own caucus over other issues. And I think a way that she can hide from a lot of the presidential candidates like Beto O'Rourke talking about taking down the existing walls.
But, you know, Dave, Democrats are not going to move on. They're planning to reissue this every 6 months and maybe get a veto out of the president twice a year, right on through the 2020 elections.
Yeah, I mean, Eric, you're putting your thumb on the political reality of this, and Matt's alluded to this too. I mean, there is a huge 2020 calculus that is overshadowing this override. I say that, but I also don't want to diminish what I think are the very serious constitutional questions that are implicated here, and I suspect that you'll see that play out in the courts with the 20-plus states that have already litigated this or are litigating this against the White House. And, you know, if anything, though, I think in some respects I do think that this helps the president because he needed to go back to his base. He needed to be able to say, I've delivered on what arguably is his most important promise to date to them. He's able to do that. And I don't think Democratic, Republican, or Republican president ever goes wrong by using Congress as a foil. And so for the president now to be able to have this issue heading into the election, really mobilizing his base, I think in some ways that helps him. And of course, you know, on our side, Democrats will be talking about immigration because that's an important issue for us. But I think in some respects, the litigation will play out sort of in a sideline to this. And if the Speaker and the Senate, Democrats and the Senate choose to bring this up every 6 months, that just means it's going to be a tough vote for Republicans every 6 months.
Well, Matt, does Dave have a point there? I mean, look, the president can go out on every single rally and say, I want a wall. We're going to build a wall. The Democrats don't want a wall. They're trying to stop it until trying to stop it now. I mean, this kind of, anyway, do you think this plays right into the president's strength on the campaign trail?
I think Dave is right. He's taking a page from the old Harry Truman playbook, running against Congress. As we saw in 2016, President Trump is best when he's running against something, when he has an enemy of sorts. We saw that in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. I don't think he thinks of Congress, namely the GOP, as an enemy, but I think what helped him with a lot of disaffected voters was he was able to rise above both parties and put a pox on the whole broken system in D.C. Now, look, if 2020 is a referendum on the president, it's going to be a little tougher for him. If it's a choice, which I think he needs it to be between him and whoever the Democrats nominate, I think that puts him in a lot better shape.
The Wall Street Journal, I want to read you about this because it impacts the senators who are up for election. They say this, quote, in an editorial. Mr. Trump put senators running for re-election in 2020 in a particular bind. Cory Gardner of Colorado, Martha McSally of Arizona, Ben Sasse of Nebraska all voted with the president. They clearly didn't want to offend the president and his supporters, but the senators have now created a political opening for their Democratic opponents. So, Dave, do you think that is the case, that now potential opponents can have something to run against the incumbents on?
Yeah, I think that's right, Eric, and I think you're making an important sort of distinction here. It's one thing for us to talk about this issue helping the president with his base. It's another thing to talk about whether this issue helps Senate Republicans, House Republicans up for re-election. If 2018, the midterms, is a guide, I think probably it doesn't help them. I think it actually puts them in a tough bind, in part because if you look at polling, consistently Americans have not been supportive of the wall. Americans believe we need tougher immigration, they believe we need immigration reform, but they don't necessarily support the wall. And so for Senate Republicans who took this vote, and especially if this vote's coming up every 6 months in the House and the Senate, that's going to really put them, I think, on the defensive heading into 2020. And I also am curious, Matt may have a view here, you know, part of the president's reelect right now, it's so narrow. And he's not growing his base. His base has been holding, but he's not growing his base. And so this issue for the general, once he's past the primaries, once he's past sort of mobilizing his base, I'm just not sure this issue really favors Republicans at all.
Yeah, Matt, what about that? I mean, you've got two tiers. You've got two tracks. You have the Republican senators are up, and the president, too. What about what Dave says about apparently not growing the base?
Well, he has a point. I think it needs to be a war of attrition. I worked for Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney in their respective presidential campaigns, and I remember very vividly Democrats would sit back almost giddy when a lot of the Republican primary candidates would have debates on these far-right issues. I see that now playing out very much so on the left. In the far left, Democrats are, you know, debating just crazy far-left issues. So Republicans, namely the president and his campaign, but also others, are able to sit back, wait for these issues to come to play in a general, and use them against whoever the Democratic nominee is. I think it's going to be a war of attrition, don't get me wrong, but as we saw with Hillary Clinton, the more unpopular you can make the Democrat, the more it's going to help the president.
And meanwhile, Dave and Matt, the president just tweeted a tweet where he shows a night vision video of apparent illegal immigrants either coming off a bus or like running through the fields and running through the fences. So this is not going away anytime soon. Matt and Dave, thank you for your insight.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Marthel.
Eric, former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke continuing his tour of Iowa this afternoon, joining 4 other prospects for the 2020 Democratic ticket on the road. A live look now at an event in another early voting state, New Hampshire, where Washington Governor Jay Inslee is about to meet with voters. All right, Jeff Paul, wrap it up for us. You're out there live on the West Coast.
Yeah, Arthel, there is a lot to get to, but we're going to begin, as you just mentioned, in New Hampshire. That's where Washington Governor Jay Inslee is set to speak at any moment. He'll be joined by some state lawmakers and Rockingham County Democrats, where he will be discussing his core issue, climate change. Now, over in Iowa, that's where former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke participated in a St. Patrick's Day 5K run. He also spoke to a crowd at the Black Hawk County Democratic Party headquarters, focusing on health care, immigration, and an issue that he's describing as a crisis.
Perhaps most importantly, because the future of the human race literally depends on it. Yes, this window of 12 years within which we have to act to confront the crisis of climate change. Yes. It is on us, it is on every single one of us to make sure that we squarely face the facts.
And while he's not the most well-known, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg announced 65,000 people have donated to his exploratory committee. That is somewhat of a big deal because it means it qualifies him to be invited to the first Democratic National Committee debate in June.
Yes,
Arthel?
It does. So, hey, what about the 2 Democrats that are considered to be the front runners in the race? What's going on with them?
Well, it's still very early on, but if you rely on some of those early polls, most of them show former Vice President Joe Biden at the top and then Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders will be in Nevada tonight for a rally in Henderson, but last night he was in South Carolina where he put a lot of emphasis on health care.
Why is it that 50 miles away from where I live in Burlington, Vermont, in Canada, people walk into any doctor's office they want. They don't have to take out their wallet. They have cancer surgery. It doesn't cost them a penny. It's paid for publicly. Why is we the only major country on earth where...
Now, even though he hasn't announced he's officially running, former Vice President Joe Biden is getting a lot of attention. He'll be attending the first state Democratic dinner tonight in Dover, Delaware. Also, in less than an hour, Senator Amy Klobuchar will be speaking in Iowa. Arthel?
Oh, boy, the heat is on. Jeff Paul, thank you. And I want to remind everybody to be sure to catch one of the 2020 Democratic candidates on Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace sits down with South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Fox News Sunday airs tomorrow at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. right here on the Fox News channel. And you can check your local listings to see when it airs on your local Fox station.
We know it looked like a brazen, reputed mob hit. on a mob boss, the first one in decades, when alleged Gambino family head Frankie Boy Cali was shot dead on the street in front of his New York City home on Wednesday. But the latest reports now say it may not have been a mob hit, but a personal dispute. We'll have the latest coming up. And it is, though, an end of an era. Well, we have an update now on what first appeared to be a brazen apparent mob hit. Police in New York City saying they do have a 24-year-old man now in custody and are questioning him about the shooting death of reputed Gambino crime family mob boss Francesco Frankie Cali earlier this week. This happened on Wednesday. The 53-year-old alleged head of the Gambino family was gunned down and run over right in front of his house on Staten Island while his family was in the house. Detectives now say the investigation is still progressing, but reports say the 24-year-old suspect may have been in a personal dispute with Cali and that the killing had nothing to do with the mafia. Police say they have not yet recovered the gun involved and are continuing. Meanwhile, John Gotti's daughter, Angel, tweeting that the media got it wrong. Ms. Gotti says that the reports that blamed her recently released uncle, Gene Gotti, for this are wrong, and Ms. Gotti is demanding an apology for her family. Arthel.
2020 Democratic presidential candidates hitting key battleground states for St. Patrick's Day. Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke in Iowa and Washington Governor Jay Inslee set to start an event in New Hampshire. We're looking at that live shot right there. Several others holding events this evening, including Senators Amy Klobuchar and Senator Bernie Sanders, as well as former Vice President Joe Biden. Joining me now is Hannah Trudeau. She's the staff correspondent for the National Journal. Hannah, that's a lot of people there we're talking about. So, of the many Democratic hopefuls at this early stage of the race, who has the luck of the Irish with him or her?
Well, it's hard to say who has the luck of the Irish, but it's easy to see who has the media attention at the moment, and that is former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke. He has been, as you mentioned, in Iowa. He's doing a 3-day swing there. He was in Waterloo earlier today, and you know, he's just one of 6 Democratic hopefuls, 2020ers, who have been making the rounds to early voting states. Iowa is just one of them. Cory Booker is also there. As you mentioned, Amy Klobuchar is doing an event tonight. And also in New Hampshire, Washington Governor Jay Inslee, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and Senator Bernie Sanders is heading off to Nevada, the first early voting state in the West.
So you're going with Beto for the first answer. Let's stick with the St. Paddy's Day references, if you will. It really is all about the green, as in campaign donations. That said, how much time does former Vice President Biden have to officially jump in the race before the big early campaign money runs out?
Well, that's the big question with Biden. He shouldn't have a problem with fundraising necessarily. And Democratic strategists that I've talked to over the past couple of years who have really kept an eye on Biden's early moves have said that he doesn't necessarily have the donor problem that other potential 2020 candidates have, in the sense that he doesn't necessarily need to pull from that small donor base that a lot of the other senators and governors are going to have to pull from. That being said, you know, he has to still get in as soon as possible if he wants to get good strategists on his side, if he wants to make his case not as vice president, but as a presidential nominee to voters.
And let's get back to Beto. I mean, some might say he's green in the area of campaigning on this high stakes level, you know, making a novice mistake in his first 2 days in Iowa, joking that his wife has been raising their 3 children, and he says sometimes with my help. And then he apologized last night. At the same time, Beto said that he acknowledged that the truth of criticism, that he said that he has enjoyed white privilege. I mean, so will all of this prove to be, Hannah, a major barrier for Beto, or just a bump in the road?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Beto has a lot to figure out. He is a green, to go with the St. Paddy's Day reference, candidate. He is a new candidate. There's a lot of, I think he has something like 30% national name recognition, so he's bound to make a lot of rookie mistakes that somebody like a Joe Biden, who in his day was known as a gaffe machine, might not be making this time around and might be a little more strategic. So Beto, I think to his credit, he apologized for some early blunders and some comments that he made about his wife. wife and his sort of role in the family. But I think a lot of Democratic women are going to be keeping an eye on him, and sort of as there are multiple female candidates in 2020, I think they'll be keeping him in check a little bit when he says things like this.
And then there is South Bend, Indianapolis Mayor Pete Buttigieg announcing today that he has 65,000 donors for his exploratory committee, which gives him a green light to take part in the first Democratic National Committee debate happening in June. So what's your early reporting on Mayor Buttigieg?
Yes, so he, in my opinion, is the true dark horse of 2020 at this point. You know, he doesn't have the name recognition that all of the top tier candidates have, certainly the senators, like somebody like a Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris even. But he is slowly but surely building up, making his case to voters, building up a little bit of name recognition. He's met that critical 65,000 unique donor threshold in at least 20 states in order to compete in the DNC primary debates. And his campaign tells me, you know, the media attention is going to come and go. He's in it for the long haul. He's not in it for the quick sort of media hits that are coming with somebody like Beto.
Hey, do you think when Vice President Biden joins the race, do you think he'll come in with a running mate, a complete ticket?
Well, that would certainly be unprecedented. I don't know that he's doing that. I haven't reported on that specifically. But, you know, I think he has a unique chance to pull a potential early running mate with him and say, you know, I might be a 70-something-year-old white man, but look at my younger, potentially younger or even female running mate. And that could be an attractive option for people who see his age and his gender as a barrier for voting for him. I'm not sure that he'll actually go that route, but it could be an interesting avenue for him to pursue.
Staff correspondent for the National Journal, Hannah Trudeau, you're off now, I think, off the clock, so you can go out and drink some green beer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
Well, rising water is threatening to shut down a nuclear power plant as Nebraska is grappling with the worst flooding that state has seen in half a century. Coming up, meteorologist Adam Klotz will have the very latest on that dire situation there. Plus, as Washington braces for special counsel Robert Mueller's reports and new court filings shed light on the role of an aide to the late Senator John McCain in spreading the controversial anti-Trump dossier.
One who keeps saying, don't rush to judgment, but that's what the evidence tends to show. And I'm just saying, I'm very, very saddened by this. Look, John McCain was an American hero who did so much for the country, but this...
So with waters continuing to rise, officials in Nebraska City, Nebraska, putting plans in place to shut down a nuclear power plant if necessary. The historic flooding has triggered multiple emergency and disaster declarations throughout the Plains and Midwest. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is tracking this in the Fox Extreme Weather Center. So what's happening, Adam?
Hey there, Arthel. Yeah, this is a large system where we're looking at river flood gauges continuing to rise. Everything you're looking at here is a river flood gauge, which is experiencing at least minor flooding. Obviously, a big area of flooding there in the upper Midwest. Everything in the orange, only minor flooding. But if we put this into a forecast, these are current. These are all forecast to maybe intensify a little bit. So you start to see more reds, more pinks, which gets you up to moderate or major river flooding. Things we're going to be watching for here over the next couple of days while this water continues to drain on down. As a result, no surprise here, everything here in the green, these are flood watches and warnings stretching from portions of Nebraska into Iowa and then southern Wisconsin. The reason for all this, a major rainstorm moved through the area on top of some snow that with that rain, it was allowed to melt. We just see a lot of water now rushing down into some of these areas. That right there is the Missouri, right here is the Mississippi, and then obviously this is all going to run south over the next several days. The good news is satellite and radar completely clear back behind this, so we do have a little bit of time to dry off now that that real big rain system moved on out of the area. The only large system we're watching so far today continues to be heavy rain falling across portions of the Gulf of Mexico. That is going to be off and on throughout the course of today, running into tonight and then early tomorrow. But our future radar shows good news for this general region where we were talking about all that very heavy rain, maybe some late showers as you get into Sunday, but Monday into Tuesday, Arthel, this is all looking clear. Now, if we go far enough into the future, I'm running you all the way to Tuesday now, mostly dry across the country. We get into Wednesday and Thursday. We're going to see another round of showers. This is far enough out. There could still be some wiggle room about where this rain moves. But Arthel, that should be enough time that we're able to see maybe some of this rain clear out, and then we'll be starting from scratch once again.
Yeah, let's hope they get a break there. All right, Adam Klotz, thank you so much.
Yep.
Robert Mueller could be approaching the end of his investigation. You know, we've heard that for weeks. But reports say an increasing number of Mueller's top investigators are leaving the office and returning to the private sector. You know, just days ago, the House voted unanimously to make Mueller's report public. All this after Paul Manafort's second sentencing this week, his former deputy Rick Gates continuing to cooperate with the government, and the special counsel's team saying former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, well, that he has wrapped up his cooperation. What comes next? David Spunt, live in Washington with that. Hi, David.
Hi, Eric. Good afternoon. A busy week for special counsel Robert Mueller and his team. Paul Manafort was sentenced last week to 7.5 years behind bars. Roger Stone's trial date now on the books for November, and Manafort deputy Rick Gates continues to cooperate with authorities, though we don't know the extent of that cooperation. Manafort, though, sitting in jail right now this afternoon. Now, if President Trump were to pardon Manafort, he's still not out of the woods by any means. Earlier this week, the Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance, announced a 16-count indictment against Paul Manafort with charges that mirror those federal charges from Virginia. President Trump would not have the authority to get Manafort out of those New York State charges if Manafort is found guilty in New York. And former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who began cooperating with the Mueller team back in 2017, apparently not needed anymore. The special counsel's office told a federal judge earlier in the week that they have everything they need at this point from Michael Flynn, the Army general. Now, this week, Congress voted 420-0. That's it. 420-0 to make the Mueller report public. It was a non-binding resolution, but one President Trump said this morning he supports. He wants the Mueller report to be made public. Eric?
Yeah, and a handful of Republicans voted present for that. Meanwhile, David, the late Senator John McCain's name was brought up as part of the investigation. We've heard about this before.
Yeah, it was peripherally, and we're learning through new court documents, Eric, that the late Senator McCain and an associate made public an unverified dossier that alleged Russians had compromising information on President Trump. We've heard about the Steele dossier for several years right now, funded by the DNC. Former Senator McCain denied being the source for BuzzFeed after the publication put that online, that dossier. However, we are learning that McCain did provide part of that dossier, specifically the first 33 pages, to the FBI back in December 2016. Now, Eric, both the president's allies and his biggest political foes have called into question the contents, though, of that Steele dossier. Eric.
All right, David. Thank you. Martha.
Sure.
Well, Eric, the close-knit town of Lordstown, Ohio, ponders life going forward. This is 1 week after General Motors shut down a production plant that employed more than half the town. Talia Kirkland speaks with the locals and the impact on their community.
It's been 1 week since production stopped at the Lordstown General Motors plant, and already the close-knit community is feeling the impact. Nisi's Country Cafe, located just a few miles down the road, is usually full of plant workers around lunchtime, but not today.
It's very slow right now.
Lisa Miller, a waitress at the cafe, says the cuts have been hard on business.
So I've said goodbye to quite a few customers that have been transferred.
But even harder for the customers she calls friends.
People are breaking up their families. You know, dads are going on ahead without moms and kids, and it's sad.
For 52 years, families in the small Ohio town lived and breathed cars. But now the only constant for residents is uncertainty. According to a General Motors spokesperson, 1,374 workers remained at the plant at its time of closure. Of those workers, roughly 417 have accepted transfers in other cities. 347 are eligible for retirement, and 100 will continue working through the end of the month, with the remaining in limbo.
Right now, the outlook for this town does not look good.
Economist Amanda Weinstein says uncertainty and potential closure will affect the entire region.
They'll see other businesses leave. They'll see families want to leave. It's not a place where they feel their kids can grow up and then work there.
January was our worst month since we opened.
Casey Watson, owner of Antiques and Uniques in the neighboring town of North Jackson, says her sales have drastically declined, with more customers coming in to sell items than to buy. But when asked will declining sales force her to close, she said no.
We'll hang on there as long as we can. I mean, you know, I believe that the sales will pick up.
The locals here are hopeful that the company will restart production on a new GM vehicle. In Lordstown, Ohio, Taya Kirkland, Fox News.
Oh, the deadly tornado that tore through Alabama, bringing out the best in people around the country. What a man is doing to help the victims after the devastation. Meanwhile, we have some updates from New Zealand. The police right now having a news conference about what is happening there. We'll bring that to you in just a moment. And then we will discuss Google. You know that the Pentagon is blaming the search engine for helping China. We have an update now on that horrible massacre in New Zealand. Police in Wellington holding a news conference right now, as you see that live. And they just said the death toll in this tragedy has risen by 1 to 50 victims now who were killed at 2 mosques where that suspected gunman, a 28-year-old man who was born in Australia, allegedly live-streamed his deadly assault. That suspect citing white supremacy in a long manifesto. He is in custody, charged with murder, and authorities expect more charges. Again, police there in Wellington, as you can see, holding a news conference. Will give you any more details, new ones, as they emerge from that news conference. Meanwhile, Google is under fire after a top U.S. general accused the company of helping boost the Chinese military against our interests. The sharp rebuke coming after the tech giant dropped a multi-billion-dollar project with the Pentagon involving cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Just take a look at what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford, said.
The work that Google is doing in China is indirectly benefiting the Chinese military. And I've been very public on this issue as well. In fact, the way I described it to our industry partners is, look, we're the good guys. In the values that we represent, in the system that we represent, is the one that will allow and has allowed you to thrive.
Gordon Chang, Asian analyst, author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, who knows all things in this region, is with us now. I mean, this is pretty astounding. It's outrageous, it sounds like. What has Google been doing?
Well, in China, it has at least 2 joint ventures. Those are in artificial intelligence. One of those joint venture partners actually has close links with the Chinese military. So clearly, whatever technology Google is sharing or developing is going to end up in the hands of the People's Liberation Army. So General Dunford is absolutely correct on that in his testimony on Thursday. It is very clear this is a direct help to China's military, and they're configuring themselves to fight the U.S.
Were you surprised by this, and how can Google apparently stop this?
Well, you know, Google can pull out of those joint ventures. Shareholders aren't going to like that. You know, in one sense, Eric, companies are amoral. They're there to make profits. You know, they're not there to define U.S. national security or to implement it. That's the job, of course, of President Trump and 535 congressmen and representatives in Congress. And those guys need to make this illegal. Force Google out of there.
Wouldn't, if Google is breaking the law, wouldn't they be charged already, or would they know and deal with the international measures that are aimed and written to prevent this?
Well, what Google is doing now is not illegal. And that really is because the United States has not defined China as an adversary or an enemy to the extent that we need, and to have the legislation to prevent cooperation of this sort. Because we know what's going on. It is helping the Chinese military, and we're allowing it. So what we need to do is criminalize this. And after that, if Google continues, then you go after them hard. But right now, this is a Congress responsibility. It's a president's responsibility. Google is sort of just taking advantage and making money.
Google says, according to reports, we have no plans to launch the search in China. They say that team members have moved on to new projects. They say their work is to make sure that our government is safe and secure, and that this country is safe and secure. What should they do immediately? Just end any cooperation with China?
Well, you know, you just talked about search, and they say they ended search, but Google employees say that Project Dragonfly, which is what you're referring to, is continuing. And so clearly Google is not stopping this. And I don't think Google should be there. You know, Google's employees sort of force the company out of its contracts with the Pentagon. Well, if they feel that way, they should be forcing the company out of its joint ventures in China. They should be stopping search, and they should be stopping a lot of other things that the CEO of Google, Pichai, wants to do.
We've talked a lot about Chinese encroachment in the United States, whether it's in college campuses, whether it's through spies, whether through its stealing of intellectual property, artificial intelligence, computing, the internet, on and on. Give us a sense. of what the strategy is from Beijing when it comes to dealing with us.
Well, it's really to penetrate the American political system, which they've done. You know, they interfere in our elections, they attack our democracy.
But the Russians got all the attention for that.
The Russians got attention, but the Chinese are doing it as well. And in the Chinese, the Ministry of State Security, their agents are operating on our soil, especially on our campuses. We've allowed this for decades. We haven't stopped it. Also, Chinese diplomats engage in activities which are clearly inappropriate, which violate our sovereignty. Trying, for instance, on campuses, to stay with that theme, you know, to tell professors not to do certain things, not to participate in certain projects. So, you know, this is on us, Eric. We need to make sure that these Chinese agents are turfed out of our soil. Also, that these diplomats, quote unquote, that they are just expelled from the United States. So this is really on us, because we've allowed this to continue for far too long. We sort of thought, oh, you know, let's be nice to the Chinese, they'll be nice back. No, it doesn't work that way.
What happens when we're nice to the Chinese?
But they just take advantage of us. You know, we've seen this. Their activities in the United States have gotten worse over time, not better. I mean, there have been warnings, but, you know, we need to do something effective, something that the Chinese will understand. And the only way to do that is to impose those costs. First of all, to expel their diplomats, expel their Ministry of State Security agents, and do a number of other things that China will understand that they can no longer deal with the U.S. as they've done in the last 4 decades.
And finally, there's been a lot of talk and testimony that China, that Beijing, is really the major power that confronts the United States over the next number of decades.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and those Chinese military officers in December, you know, you had that Rear Admiral say in public he wanted unprovoked attacks on the U.S. Navy in the global commons. He talked about sinking 2 aircraft carriers, killing 10,000 Americans. You know, and what did we do? We didn't do anything, Eric. I mean, we're not deterring the Chinese, and they're becoming more and more belligerent. They're using artificial intelligence to power their military to kill Americans. So this has got to stop.
Gordon Chang, as always. Gordon, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Arthel?
Gordon and Eric, thank you very much. Well, overseas, a bank is set on fire in Paris as yellow vest protesters clash with police for the 18th weekend in a row. Firefighters had to rescue a mother and her child who lived in an apartment above the bank. The protests taking a violent turn after demonstrators threw rocks and smoke bombs at officers. The yellow vest protesters are a grassroots movement seeking populist changes to that economy. Back here at home, gunfire erupts on the Vegas Strip after a brazen robbery attempt ends in a police shootout. Details straight ahead. Plus, as the cause of the 2 recent Boeing 737 MAX jet plane crashes, MAX 8 plane crashes under investigation, airlines are beginning to feel the economic effects of the grounding of this aircraft. So how are travelers coping with it?
Bulletproof vest credited with saving a Las Vegas police officer's life. Police say he was shot by a man who robbed a casino's poker cage. That suspect, they say, fired at police outside of the famed Bellagio Hotel and Casino and hit the wounded officer in the chest. Another officer, they say, returned fire and then hit the suspect. The officer was treated at the hospital and released. The suspect is now in critical condition.
Air Canada and United Airlines becoming the first major North American carriers to speak out on how the grounding of Boeing 737 MAX 8 and 9 planes will affect business following last weekend's Ethiopian Airlines crash that killed 157 people. Jackie Heinrich joins us live from LaGuardia Airport with the latest there in Queens. Jackie? All right. I don't think we have Jackie's audio, so let's get her audio fixed and we'll get back to Jackie in the next block. Thank you. Eric?
Well, meanwhile, coming up, we'll talk about President Trump. You know, he used his veto pen for the very first time in his presidency to block that resolution ending the national emergency. Now, the battle lines have been drawn for a showdown again over the border wall. What will it happen and what will it mean? We are live in Washington. Ahead.